Hello. I guess we're not live. My computer is really slow, man.
Oh yeah, all good. It says we're live, but sometimes
Is
it can
it?
be a little deceiving. Are we streaming on LinkedIn and YouTube as at the same time or?
No, we don't have this permission yet.
Hmm.
Is it live for you? I trust you.
It says it's live, but I don't know where you're streaming at.
Yeah, we are live. We are live
Cool.
on YouTube.
Uh-oh, it looks like we lost Kyle. I might be Oh,
Yeah,
Kyle's back.
I'm
There
back.
you
Well, I guess today is going to be with lots of emotions, I guess.
go.
Wi-Fi emotions. So welcome everybody. This is our third meetup, no, fourth meetup in English with the Bots Brazil community. Welcome, Chad. How are you today?
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Really excited to have you here to talk a little bit about future and AI too. So before we start, every event in the Bots Brazil community, we usually explain the community why we're doing this in English. So I would like just to review that real quick. That's the only time ever that I'm going to speak in Portuguese during this live event. So just a second. Bem, pessoal, transparência para a nossa comunidade brasileira. Este evento é parte da nossa série chamada Hello World, e todo o conteúdo será apresentado em inglês. E, em poucos dias, o próprio YouTube oferece uma legenda automática que pode ser traduzida para português. De toda forma, nós, da comunidade, se comprometemos a revisar e atualizar a legenda alguns dias após a transmissão. A gente agradece a sua compreensão e a gente pede o seu feedback nesse formato. A sua opinião é muito importante para nós. Se vocês quiserem saber mais, é só entrar em contato com a gente. Beleza? So, yeah, I guess that's all. That's the main message. You get the idea, right?
Yes, of course.
How is your Portuguese? We briefly joke a week,
Yeah,
3 weeks ago.
Obrigado. I think that's about as much as I got into it. So
yeah, well, you have a good pronounce. Do you speak Spanish or something like this?
no, I unfortunately don't. I speak a little bit of Japanese, but like I'd probably forgotten like most of it, to be honest. So just English.
Just English for today. Yeah, it's perfect. So for who doesn't understand or haven't not be here in an event of Bots Brazil, usually we start the events with like a 5-10 minutes icebreaking, and then we jump into the presentation. This is enough time so the audience can just join us. Usually it takes about 5 or 10 minutes so people can just join this live streaming and watch with us. If you're not watching this live, this is going to be like a recorded session. So everything that we say here is kind of recorded based on whatever people are saying to us in the live chat. And yeah, so for the live streaming or for the ice-breaking thing, I have 2 questions, and it's just like a side joke or something like this, or just to start the conversation. Today, we're going to talk a lot about the future. And honestly, I love to think about the future. I read a lot about the future. And I wonder if you have some movies, comics, or books that it's like a fiction or something like this that you think that is something that is related to your belief that about the future that we're going to live in like 5 or 10 years. Any movies that you like to recommend?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think media often inspires us to think about the future, and just over the course of like the last like 50 years, we can sort of look back at comic books that depicted the future. For me, I really like Blade Runner. I mean, I think it really has that aesthetic of what the future could potentially be like. Hopefully not all of the things in Blade Runner, because some of them are a little bit scary, but I really like the sort of melding of technology in a way that seems realistic. I think there's a lot of other depictions about the future that seem a little bit too polished. So I like sort of the realism that Blade Runner interjects. And also, of course, the movies are awesome. Sort of on a more fictional and
Which
I
which
guess
Blade Runner are you talking about? The first one or the second one, or
I would
both?
say both of them, but like the newer one is actually really cool. So yeah, I would probably say both.
Yep.
Uh, so I also mention a book that it's a nonfiction book, but I
Mm.
really love the author's sort of view and perspective and predictions about the future. So that book is called AI Superpowers. It's by this gentleman. His name is Kai-Fu Lee. And Kai-Fu Lee actually, he founded the Google's AI research labs in China. And then since then, he started up his own VC fund out of China. And I find the book like incredibly fascinating from a multiple different perspectives. I think one of them is just really being able to understand where China and the US will sort of be in 5 years. What
Mm.
areas of AI research, we are very good at in the US versus what's China very good at. And I think it's certainly the book and the author, Kai-Fu Lee, are certainly leading indicators to me when I start to think about who I should be looking at, in the space of AI to try and anticipate, what new technologies, what new experiences might emerge over the course of the next several years here.
About like a fiction book, do you have any favorite one?
Fiction book. That's a good question.
I mean, honestly,
Yeah,
we're kind of living in a dream today, right? Like we
right.
have like this square that it's like we can do anything with this. If we go back in like 30 years ago, that would be like, wow, what's that? That's crazy. Like a piece of like glass can do all that. We're living just like a fiction. We're getting in the cyberpunk era if Elon's vision works out, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. I can't think of any book that comes to mind, but to be honest, I haven't been reading a whole lot of fiction books lately. But I think that maybe sort of speaks to sort of the future that we're living in, right? It's a lot of old and new media, right? It's like we spend a lot of time probably reading on internet. I spend a lot of time catching up on different blogs and different people to follow. But then, old media too, which is really interesting. Like podcasting has gotten just like incredibly popular. And it's so interesting because it almost harkens back to the days of radio broadcasting, right? But for
Yep.
us, we enjoy it and we use it as a way that we can, learn about things on the go. So podcasts have been sort of major right now as well. I've been listening to the Artificial Intelligence podcast by Lex Friedman. Great podcast, interviews a whole lot of awesome guests. So definitely would suggest checking that out. But yeah, books. That's a good question.
Well, but you said something really interesting, like
Hmm.
podcasts. For example, um, I don't know how to say that in English, but in the like 50s, 40s, like the soap opera, like in Brazil, it's really popular to have soap opera in televisions, things like that. But back then, we didn't have televisions, right? So what people used to watch slash like listen to. So basically, we have like these radio soap operas. How do you call that? Is that the same? How what
Yeah,
would
I
be?
think it's probably very similar. Radio soap opera, radio broadcasts. I think that's probably what they were called. Of course, I probably am not old enough to actually know the real terminology. I don't think either of us probably are. So, but yeah, I mean, it's super crazy because if you think about, are you familiar with H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds?
Nope. What is that?
So it's a very famous book. Essentially, it's this book about, and this was back in like, I think the 1930s or 40s about how aliens come and they like, there's this, they try to take over Earth, but they actually broadcasted that story over the radio back in the day. And some people thought it was real. Some people thought like aliens were actually attacking them because, if you think about it, that was the primary medium of the time. So I
Mm.
just find that fascinating.
Mm. Well, my point about this radio soap opera thing is that recently, Spotify made a partnership with like a media channel down here. They launched a radio soap opera in a podcast format, which is eight episodes, like 20 minutes episodes, talking about the future of AI and how it's going to be connected in and present in our everyday lives. So it's like actors like acting, but just with the voice. And it funny fact is that was produced by an American team, which I forgot the name right now. But I was curious about like how they would produce that because they don't speak Portuguese. And Portuguese is a really tricky language. But if you like to check that out later, just to feel have the feeling about what it's about, it's Sophia. It's a podcast soap opera. It has one season now. It's 8 minutes. It's 8 episodes, 20 minutes each, and talks about. I'm not going to tell you the plot. I don't like to give you spoilers, but just to briefly introduce you, is the idea of someone working with AI and then become the AI. It's like the magic, Oz magic, magic of Oz thing. So it's that you have that feeling of being the voice and having like, oh, I forgot. I thought that Rodrigo kind of mentioned it. It's like the word of words, the war of words. Yep, I never saw that, but I know the very first one. It's a movie. I don't know if have you seen that movie though?
Yeah, that's what I was actually mentioning. So it originally was broadcasted over the radio, maybe 50 years ago, 60 years ago. It's interesting to see those parallels now because you're talking about these, series, the Sophia series that you're mentioning now about AI and how like we're seeing these parallels that sort of draw back years ago. So in some respects, some technology is new, right, and unprecedented, but some of it is really just a reimagination, right? It's like radio broadcasting and podcasting today, we're taking some of the very same elements, but then there are transformational technologies like smartphones, as you mentioned, which just become this digital conduit, right? That's how we interact with the digital world around us, or that's the primary one today.
Yeah.
So it's just super fascinating, like how we see the evolution of technology over time. Some of it is, incremental, and some of it is just completely transformational.
Yep. And it's getting confusing. Like, what is what? Now things are connected to the internet. Everything is part of the internet now. We have these little things here. I don't know if you can see it. My Google Home thing. Yeah, man, it's crazy. I wonder how do you like talk to people about that future if people don't understand yet. So how do you talk about? That's my next ice-breaking question. How do you talk about AI with people that they're not like tech related? Like, how do you introduce that for these folks? I guess that my answer to that, just to give you like a glimpse, would be something related to Sophia, the podcast, because it's really like in people's life. The character, she's just doing what we do. Like we walk in the street, we see our friends, and then we say like, "Hey Siri, what my calendar today?" I hope it doesn't trigger. The Sophia series is about this normal, everyday thing. It's crazy, and I guess that's the way to talk about the future for in this particular way. How do you talk to these people? Like they are not aware of that, and how do you introduce that for them?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. There's really two ways that I like to talk about it. So the first way is, just very simple, right? Just as a carpenter has many tools, right, in his toolbox, a hammer, a nail file, a screwdriver, a saw, a bandsaw, and all these different applications, in my mind, that sort of embodies the concept of technology, right? And any individual technology or any individual tool can do, one or two or three things very well, but it's the composition of the multiple technologies that enables you to create things of vastly more complex value, right? So, I think when I talk about AI, it's to sort of say that, AI is just another tool, right? It's just another way that we are manipulating our environment in a way where it's more conducive for computers, right? So it's like for a human, if I were trying to create a computer vision model, if I was a human, I would have to look at like millions of pictures of like birds and, maybe hours of like just experiencing birds. But for a computer, I can literally train a model in one day on 100,000 images of birds, right? So then that actually dovetails into the other way I like to talk about it. I like to also talk about it in the sense of, there are no solutions. There are only trade-offs, right? So the trade-off here is the fact that computers are vastly more positioned to do certain tasks, right? So if we start to look at what are humans really good at doing, for humans, I think one of the last things that's going to be automated are things that require a high degree of motor functions. If you just think about the complexity involved with, cleaning a window, right? For humans like us, that's very easy, right? But for robots, orchestrating that coordination, leveraging computer vision, and analyzing the telemetry data and pulling that all together into a seamless experience is very tricky, right? So we have to think about things in trade-offs. What are humans really good at doing? What are robots really good at doing? Now, robots, back to my point around computer vision, are great at crunching data and generalizing models to a certain extent, right? So the two ways to look at it is that, AI is just a tool. And then also we need to look at AI in regards to trade-offs, right? Well, let's make it simple. Let's just say, what are humans good at doing? What are robots good at doing? And how do we combine both of those strengths to create a superior experience?
That's a good take. um, Recently, I watched like TED. Do you like
Yeah.
TEDs?
TED Talks.
Yeah, TED Talks. There is a really incredible one. The title is "The Incredible Inventions of Intuitive AI" by Maurice Conti. Have you seen? It's a really no. It just shows up for me like recently, and so the his presentation is about like how AI is becoming part of our world and we don't even see it. And as you said, like AI is just a tool. And one of the things that he says that really got me is that like think about any tools that we invented, like a pen or like a post-it, whatever, like even like a mouse, like my mouse, whatever. Like think any technology, everything is just like passive, like is there. We need to
Right.
do things with it, right? It's just a tool. It's there, waiting for us. But now we have the opportunity using AI to not be only like passive, but also to generate things right there. Like I can just say, "Hey Google," and then it's let me just stop. Yeah, and then it's going to happen just in front of me. I can ask about the weather. I can ask if I need to get like an umbrella to go out, or how is my calendar. It just says like there, like it's creating right there. I guess that the next thing is going to be the intuitive. Like this is what the Maurice on the Tech Talks talks about. Like it's going to be predicting the future and things like that. What do you think about this idea, like passive, generative, intuitive? I think that,
Absolutely.
is this a crazy idea? Like it's
I
like
think
there.
I think it's the idea. I think that's the trajectory that we're slowly making progress towards, right? I mean, it's specifically to what you're saying, right? The computing ecosystem that we're creating around us right now is this persistent and also pervasive ecosystem that I think is slowly coming together. And I think the idea that encapsulates that is sort of a sort of relatively new buzzword that we're starting to see the big incumbent technology vendors talk about. Your Googles, Microsofts, Amazons, they start talking about recently
What?
ambient computing.
Ambient computing. Yeah, I was
Ambient
about to guess
computing,
that.
right? And I agree with you. I think it's incredibly exciting that we're going to be able to, instead of humans having to understand the mechanisms of extracting value out of technology, the ecosystem of technology around us becomes entirely user-centric, right? So the ambient components around us, right, to your point, don't always have to be these things that we, right, intend to interact with, right? It could be computer vision, which is looking at our facial expression and then triggers, your voice assistant and asks how you're doing, right? And I think the exciting thing is the orchestration of all of these different technologies together, not only orchestration of sensors and interfaces, but also the orchestration of these, the accessibility of data on the back end and what data can be accessed. And when you wrap that together, you start being able to do some really exciting things, right? So I think the most simple case everyone talks about is just with smart homes, right? If my home knows that I'm coming home at a certain time, it knows to set the right temperature. Maybe it knows on Wednesdays that I like to order pizza, so it automatically orders that, right? So the objective of ambient computing is really about what you mentioned. It's about anticipating what the user is trying to achieve and then orchestrating an accessible ambient computing architecture ecosystem around the person to enable that.
We're going to get there eventually. And I guess one of the very first steps is about applying that idea in the workplace, right? So let's start.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're getting there. So it was
we're
nice.
Going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it. I have a couple slides in my presentation that will touch on that a little bit. But again, I just want to thank everyone from Bots Brazil. Thank you, Kyle, for setting this up and inviting me on here. I'm really excited to share with you guys, all of you, some insights. As we've taken this journey into the workplace and really trying to understand how bots are transforming the future of work. So without further ado, we will jump in here.
Yep. All right. It's not in my apartment. Before we go that, I just would like to just walk through real quick about Bots Brazil. So Bots Brazil is a community of people that has a big interest in bots, conversational UI, and AI. We were created in 2016 to promote these discussions in Portuguese. But with time, we learned that we need to be talking in English too, so we can get connected with everybody around the globe. Today, we have about 12,000 people. We write a lot in Portuguese, and many of the things that we do, it's basically in Portuguese. Once in a year, we host a global meetup in San Francisco. Usually happens at Slack. So the past 3 years, has been at Slack. And I guess the first one, 2 years was Slack, and then the first one was at Mozilla. So we host many events. I'm showing here some pictures of that. Someone speaking, a group having a discussion, and then there is a big group of people posing for a picture. That is about around 100 people, 80 people, something like that. In the audience was 38 countries, people from 38 countries. So it was a really diverse meeting. So every event that we do, we have a code of conduct. Basically, it's just to promote or share positive attitudes. Our goal as a community is to create an inviting, safe environment for exchanging experiences, so we can collaborate, we can respect each other, and create networking, of course. Unfortunately, we're doing this on live events, just live on YouTube, but whenever it's possible, we're going back to have in-person meetings. And honestly, I might visit Seattle really soon, so we can do this in person. Let's do it. So for those who are just getting here at the Bots Brazil channel, we have many events in Portuguese. This in particular is our event from a series called Hello World, which basically it's a series of meetups that we do in English. Since we are a Brazilian community and English down here is a privilege, we like to think that we prefer to have more discussions in Portuguese, and then whenever it's possible, we connect the audience with the English content too. One day we're going to be able to have fully conversations in English, and having an AI that can be live translating everything that we do. So without further ado, Chad is going to talk about conversational AI and the future of the work. We're going to be having some slides from him. Actually, I'm just adding here right now. And then we're going to be back in the end for quick Q&A sessions, okay?
Great, I appreciate the introduction, and I'm looking forward to this. So just jumping into the slide presentation. So I wanted to put this presentation together to not only talk about conversational AI, but also provide the context, what's going on, why is this important? So just jumping forward to the first slide here. So as everyone knows, there are some prevailing circumstances right now that are changing how we work in the workplace. And organizations are reactively adapting today. They have to adapt. They're getting forced to adapt, but some will learn how to thrive from this. And I think that's the really exciting opportunity here. One example specifically is how Adobe is thriving with conversational AI. In a span of just a weekend, they had to switch over 22,000 employees to remote work. And as expected, certain processes, procedures broke. And as a result, their IT requests, that support not only their employees, but also their customers and partners just skyrocketed. So as a result, very quickly, they had put together and integrated a chatbot that really helped to take the load off of the internal IT ticket desk. And I think the results here sort of speak for themselves. Ticket routing from 10 hours to 20 minutes, call volumes dropped by 35%, 97% accuracy. Obviously, that is predicated on continuous testing and optimization of their NLP models. But I think the really exciting part here is the fact that they are transitioning from simply adapting to the new normal to thriving. So if they've taken these principles, their learnings, the experience from this internal IT bot, and they have created a center of excellence to essentially establish best practices around building conversational AI experiences. And they are now rolling out these findings in other types of chatbots within the organization, within the finance department and customer-facing use cases, as well as also facilitating significant change management initiatives internally. And essentially that translates to curriculum around AI they have rolled out and made accessible to any developer or engineer in the organization. So I think this is really the right approach to go from adapting to actually thriving in the new normal here. And there are a number of additional standout use cases about organizations, both small and large enterprises, leveraging internal-facing chatbots. Coca-Cola quite recently has partnered with Microsoft to begin to integrate internal-facing chatbots with Power Virtual Agents. Northwell Health is a hospital chain that has created chatbots that interface with their doctors. Epicor has recently rolled out a Q&A bot to address questions around HR. So there's a number of different organizations that are benefiting from conversational AI in the workplace. But as I had mentioned when I started the presentation, I want to sort of step back. I want to talk about the narrative. What is the narrative of why we are using chatbots and conversational AI in the workplace today? And I just want to provide that context here. So, whether you're a stakeholder that's looking to make the case to your management to adopt bots, or if you're another conversational AI agency that's looking to build workplace chatbots, I wanted to provide that context so we can thoroughly understand what is the foundation these justifications are built on top of. So first off, let's just put it out there. The digital shift isn't new. We've been on this journey for the past 20 years. And even longer, it could be justified. We've seen the consumerization of storage, network, and compute, and out of that grew these really revolutionary new business models. And before we started the presentation, we were talking about how the smartphone has become the conduit, to engaging with the internet. And we're continuing to see these modernization initiatives as well as digital optimization, through technologies like AI and RPA and advanced analytics. So the question really is, if that trend isn't new, what has changed? Because certainly many things have changed. And that really is the fact that the trend now today is accelerating tremendously at a tremendous pace that we haven't seen before. And just to, make it a point, at Microsoft, they saw 2 years worth of digital transformation occur in 2 months. And I think this was around the March, April time period. So let's sort of talk about what are the drivers, right? There are reactive drivers and there's also proactive drivers that are fueling this acceleration of digital transformation, the imperative. Now, the big one we all sort of get is, COVID-19. It's been an unprecedented set of circumstances that have fundamentally changed the way that we work, right? A lot of remote work is now the norm. Traditional business models at a retail level are being disrupted, and now they are moving towards e-commerce. There's skill reprioritization that's going on right now as well. As we're seeing, different focuses in the workplace begin to shift. So that's the one we all get. Now, beyond that, we're also seeing shifting digital behaviors, not only for end consumers, but also for employees. Messaging has become, quite frankly, the new email for a lot of us. We're spending almost equal amounts of time on messaging platforms as email. E-commerce and podcasting have become things that we just do out of nature and we don't even think about. The third thing that is a huge factor today is the fact that many companies are realizing if they have an intentional approach to data, automation, and AI, they can actually utilize that to craft competitive advantages. They're crafting these competitive moats. I think the best case recently just came out is that Tesla has now begun to beta test full self-driving, which begins to really speak to the point that they have leveraged data, AI, and automation to really put themselves ahead years, in fact, of their competition. So for organizations, it's beginning to really consider, how do we begin to leverage data, automation, and AI to create defensible moats in our market space as well? The fourth factor, and this is one I think most people are readily aware of, it's the fact that globalization is increasing. Competitiveness is skyrocketing, right? As we see new digital economies come online and them competing at the same international level, that more traditional economies such as the US has been competing in, is a factor that's not going away. So, the point here, which I'm sure everyone agrees with, is digital transformation isn't a luxury, it's an imperative. Right? And not just because COVID is transforming the way that we work, but also for all of those other factors, right? It's like if you don't get, a handle and a methodology around AI automation and data, your competition will, and they will be creating these defensible moats that are going to be very, very difficult to catch up with. So let's sort of talk about, okay, what is digital transformation? Now, the way that we like to think about it is that it's technology initiatives that create experiences that drive value, right? So it's both customer experience plus employee experience. And that's the way that we like to think about what digital transformation is actually driving when we want to talk about, tangible things. It's tangibly creating new experiences that create more value, heightened accessibility for those end users. Now, there's sort of a problem that's been looming for some time. It seems like many organizations, not to fault them, they've spent the majority of time focusing on customer-facing experiences, to the detriment sometimes of employee experience, which doesn't seem to get the same love as customer-facing experience initiatives. So spent a lot of time, as I was mentioning, customer facing, less time on employee experience. And, it's not just me that's saying this is an imperative. So Gartner has been pretty much saying we're missing the mark. If only 13% of employees are fully satisfied with their experience at their place of work, And 92% of employees are sort of reporting they're having to do these manual processes or unnecessarily difficult, complicated tasks. I think we're really seeing a divide, a gap, and it's something that we need to address. And I think a good way of thinking about this is considering how the digital workplace really impacts employee experience. So on the left side here, that's Uber. That's the Uber app, right? And on the right side, this is, if you're coming from the enterprise or mid-market space, that's probably a user interface or a user experience that you're quite familiar with. And, it's almost night and day how much more seamless Uber is and how much of the digital transformation focused on customer experience and not really on employee experience. And I think, it doesn't really take an expert to see that significant divide. Now, I think the great thing about this is the fact that, the way that we address employee experience isn't anything radically different. All we need to do is we need to apply the same principles around customer experience and apply them with employee experience. It's the same exact things, right? Personalized interactions, intuitive user experiences, reduce friction, ongoing value, instant access, and consumerization. So consumerization sort of speaks to this idea where, consumers can easily reach out and get something, right? So that would be in Amazon. And now we're seeing the same things around consumerization of IT as well. If you begin looking at some of these ITSM platforms. Now, I think the really cool thing is the fact that, if we put these things in place, if we do create a digital workplace that is very beneficial for our employees, it creates this virtuous cycle of value, right? If we can take the things off our employees' plates that are really manual, are very complicated, then that frees up employees to actually focus on really important things when it comes to the customer experience. And as these things cycle, employee experience and customer experience go hand in hand and create ultimately more value for each of these different hemispheres. And just to sort of drill this point in, the benefits are pretty clear, right? So, as we can see here from Forbes, organizations that do prioritize employee experience, outperform their counterparts, their competitors by significant leaps and bounds. Not only revenue, but, higher employee engagement, increased productivity, and a lower attrition, right? If you don't want high turnover, let's start to think about how do we create a digital workplace that really adheres and augments our employees. So we sort of talked about the digital workplace and employee experience, but I wanted to sort of step back and talk about what is the future of work? And for us, we believe the future of work is about minimizing the gap between accessing information and action taking. So if we can minimize those gaps, employees will be vastly more productive and happy and get a focus on more higher order tasks. And, that's why to us, and I think probably many of you on this call that are watching today as well, definitely see how conversational AI, through its different touch points, whether that's voice, chatbots, multimodal, really speak to that vision and idea, right? Of accelerating access to information and making it easier to take action. And I think that's the shift that's going on here. So we're moving from keyword-based interfaces that traditionally drove information. So we can think about search engines, right? Whether that is, a customer-facing search engine like Google, or a private intranet, like let's say like a SharePoint or something in the Microsoft ecosystem. And now we're moving to conversations that actually can drive action. So this specifically speaks to, acceleration and faster decision-making. And we see some examples here, both on the customer-facing side, as well as specifically on the employee-facing side. We see an example here of password resets, right? It's something we probably, do every once a year or maybe several times a year, if you're like me, a little forgetful with passwords, a tremendous opportunity, right? Instead of me jumping on a phone, waiting 10, 20 minutes for internal IT support to change my password, I minimize that gap and I can get it done myself. So I want to talk about the really interesting concepts that are shifting, like what's actually changing. So beyond the fact that we're moving from keywords that drove information to conversations that drive action, there are also two really fundamental things that are changing. So one is sort of the obvious thing around complexity abstraction. So essentially, we are moving away from command line interfaces, pointers and clickers, and we're now getting to a much more natural experience facilitated by natural language processing. And of course, we all see the value in that natural interface and how it abstracts layers of complexity. We can also think about it from the standpoint of how it actually simplifies workflows as well. So we can think about it from the perspective of how workflows are beginning to get condensed because there are certain steps in those workflows that are no longer necessary. The other part that I think is less obvious that is really interesting is that the user experience onus is shifting. So what do I mean there? So if you think about all traditional user interfaces, the responsibility to be able to achieve an outcome from a computer system was entirely with the user of that interface, right? I needed to know what were the right keywords to search, or I needed to know, what was the right combination of buttons and clicks in order to get the specific report. But now the onus is shifting onto technology, where the technology, the conversational AI, is supposed to try to interpret what our objective is and what we're trying to achieve, and then surface that. So that paradigm is beginning to shift. So our vision at Chat Mode is really about accelerating access to information. And what we believe is that, in the next 2 to 3 years, what we're going to begin to see is an intelligent assistant for every single employee. And what does that look like, right? It's not just one specific modality or one specific data source. It will be an orchestration, a multi-channel, multi-assistant, multi-platform experience that we are pulling together, both on the side of interfaces, right? So we see here, whether it's a traditional phone call that's maybe talking to, an upgraded IVR system, or a chatbot on a messaging platform, or a smart speaker, or any combination of those things will be orchestrated. Similarly, with the accessibility of data that we can access as well, from traditional databases and knowledge graphs to even data that traditionally was inaccessible that we can now access with things like robotic process automation. And then this actually gets further accelerated when we start to think about sensors that we can begin to put into our environment that provide more insight, such as computer vision or even acoustical analysis. So essentially, that's where we're heading. But I think a really important part to that is you need to identify an extensible architecture that is key for a user-centric future. So what does that mean exactly? Right now, what we see within the ecosystem of just conversational AI are a lot of platforms that focus on specific areas, right? And what I think that will mean is that as we begin to see more innovation around some of these other areas, such as RPA or computer vision, it may be difficult to extend your solution from just voice or just chatbots to a more expansive and pervasive type of virtual assistant for your employees. So, it's funny because Gartner is actually saying right now that choosing a platform is a tactical decision because essentially you're anticipating that you will have to change platforms in the future. Now, the other school of thought is identifying extensible architectures that are already setting, the foundation to connect and integrate these technologies. And we do a lot of consulting in the Microsoft ecosystem, and we really like the virtual assistant framework. Because essentially the idea is, you're able to create individual chatbots that you can put and compartmentalize into skills. And then eventually what you're able to do is create sort of a master bot of sorts that can integrate with a number of those existing skills within your organization. And not only that, but also beginning to integrate into other forms of automation like robotic process automation or computer vision or even edge and IoT. So I think the really important thing today is looking for those extensible architectures that will help you really be in a position to build these virtual assistants, more comprehensive virtual assistants in the future. Now, that being said, that might be 2, 3, 4, even 5 years off. So, what we've done is we've made a technology maturity model for today. Like, what can we feasibly do today as organizations to build solutions that benefit employees? And we see it on these 4 criteria here. At the most simple level, we want to just address notifications and reporting. And, the channels that we're already on can facilitate that, whether that's Slack, whether that's Microsoft Teams, getting those really proactive and informative notifications or reporting from backend user interfaces really accessible. And then jumping to knowledge management, backend integrations, and advanced workflow automation. And I'll get into some of these things later on in the presentation here. But this is sort of the way that we're taking customers on this process of evolving from a simple technology use case to something more advanced. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with a conversational AI value chain, but for those that aren't as familiar, I'm just going to go through it very briefly here. So when you think about what is a conversational AI experience, it encompasses a number of different components that are necessary to make the overall experience. From the initial business case, which is really important in even identifying a use case that is going to be able to create instant value is very important, to the data analysis of potentially cluster analysis of data, the training, annotation, and cleaning, to conversational design. A huge imperative. Building and implementing and evangelizing a systematic process that you can teach to anyone in your organization to design really good experiences, I think is key. And then beyond that is sort of the more traditional architecture of a conversational AI pipeline, your ASRs, NLP, NLG potentially, dialogue, context, sentiment analysis are all components that may factor into that experience. The other component that's really important is not only being able to just build the bot, but also being able to manage it over the entire life cycle, an end-to-end experience. So also ensuring that that middleware is present, whether that's for analytics, orchestration, security, or even maintenance. Ensuring that's in place is key. And then finally, at modality, right? What channels are you deploying on? What modalities are you deploying on? What sensors even are you integrating with? So this is a really high level of like what a conversational interface looks like. So now jumping to my favorite part here, talking about use cases. So we're going to just go quickly through some of the ones that I had mentioned previously. And I'm just going to run through these here. So first of all, automated reporting, the most simple type of use case you can deploy that will drive some instant value, right? Not really a complex conversational experience, but within the workplace for employees, this can be paramount, right? Think about how much time you're spending logging into ERP systems or marketing automation platforms or CRM systems and pulling reports, or triggering notifications. Let's say for sales pipeline, if I'm a sales director, I need to know these pieces of information. We can utilize messaging platforms as a delivery mechanism to provide insightful information quicker. Beyond that, one of the most popular use cases that we're seeing really across sectors and verticals is knowledge management. Can we deliver organizational information at scale? It doesn't matter what organization, we're talking about here. All of them have this distributed repositories of knowledge, right? So whether that's PDFs or presentations or marketing or sales collateral, it takes a lot of time to access that information. So with chatbots, if we can just extract or machine read these documents and make accessible, I can tell you today organizations are finding a ton of value even with these simple use cases here. And now as we begin to sort of move down those layers of complexity, the next sort of step is actually integrating with those ERP solutions, CRM, marketing automation, CMS platforms, to not only extract information, not only get reporting information, but also to be able to modify data, update data, remove data, inline in conversations. From sales to IT with ITSM, there's broad applicability across the space. I think there's a lot of really promising use cases around sales right now for sales teams, but also more traditionally, once we start to integrate into IT ticketing systems for, let's say, internal IT support, extreme amounts of value here. And I think we actually talked about one was the first example with Adobe. So moving beyond back-end integrations, I think the really exciting thing that's beginning to sort of scratch the surface on what virtual assistants can really be like is what we're calling advanced workflow automation. So that's when we begin to daisy chain multiple technologies together to drive action, right? So if we consider, for example, an IT customer support use case, if I could essentially, let's say I need a server provisioned. If I could not only get, the right information, but also for it to trigger, let's say, a robotic process automation flow and spin up that instance for me. Or maybe another example is, using computer vision or OCR to read specific things for me and trigger some sort of automation flow. That's where things become very, very exciting. And we're beginning to see, at least we are, the integration between RPA and conversational AI. Okay, so I know I talked a lot about bots. What about voice? So at chat mode, our focus isn't as much on voice, but from our partners, we're hearing a couple of things. So number one, we're seeing wide implementation around traditional IVR modernizations, specifically around customer support is really big right now. I was actually on a podcast 2 weeks ago with Microsoft Germany, and they've been doing a lot of implementations around, refactoring and modernizing those IVR flows and doing some really cool things beyond just your sort of standard, you get on a phone call and talk to a virtual agent. They're also using that to trigger phone calls to other departments, which I think is really interesting. Second thing is intelligent data capture. We're seeing this in really two areas, at least we are. One is in the industrial sector. So on the manufacturing floor, we're seeing use cases around data entry or Q&A when they're in the manufacturing process, whether to troubleshoot or whether to gain or enter information. We're seeing voice applications there quite a bit. Similarly, we're seeing voice applications begin to act as sort of replace surveys or data capture. So when I was talking to the gentleman from Microsoft Germany, he was telling me that they are building voice bots today that capture information on construction sites. And then he said it was even accessible to really support ensuring that they were getting accurate data, right? Because data quality is also really important. And the voice interface was sort of asking the construction workers, hey, did you enter this as well? So it also helps with data accuracy. The really exciting thing about voice right now is the fact that since we've transitioned to more of a remote workplace, there are emerging greenfield opportunities. So if you consider, for example, in a workplace, it's probably not as socially accessible to be talking to a voice interface when I'm around my colleagues, right? They are trying to focus on work. But because everyone or most of everyone is now working remote, I think there are new opportunities to take those same use cases I was just talking about and apply them to voice. So that's where there's really interesting things, I think, about to happen here. Cool. So now I just want to quickly go over some tangible takeaways. actionable strategies and advice if you're looking to begin to implement conversational AI in the workplace. I'm going to run through a couple of these things very quickly here. So first off, I think a really huge thing that we're beginning to run into is like organizations are getting in trouble. They are either building conversational AI or just AI models in general that are not representative to all of the stakeholders, all of the end users that are using these things. So I think it's vitally important to really instill responsible AI practices as soon as possible, because it's going to filter out into your entire organization. Everything from the hiring pipeline to the AI auditing is going to be imperative as we begin to transition more into a digitized world. Secondly, before you even start an AI project, you need to consider the fact that the traditional adoption cycles for AI are vastly different from traditional IT procurement cycles or IT adoption in that manner. I'm not going to go through too much of it, but we really like Andrew Ng's AI transformation playbook. I think it's a really good strategy, a really good set of principles to, really embody before you start an AI project here. Because things are a bit different, just going through these steps real quickly. Number one, you want to execute pilots that can gain momentum, that can create this initial value very quickly. And you want to parlay that into building an in-house team that actually has expertise, that actually has stakeholder buy-in because they saw the initial small wins, and then begin to evangelize those learnings throughout the organization, not too dissimilar from what Adobe is doing, creating these curriculums so, other employees within the organization will understand the value and also how accessible it is to create these things. And then finally, only when you're at this point, you can now intentionally develop an AI strategy. Now, some people ask, why don't we do the AI strategy as step one? And the factor here is that if your organization doesn't have buy-in and doesn't see the value, and your technical leaders are not well versed in what AI can do, your strategy will not be very effective. So that's why it's step 4. And then finally, a more broad-based communication effort across the organization. Diverse groups of employees can begin to understand and try and identify opportunities for AI as well. The other factor here is conversational design. Huge topic of extreme importance. I've talked to organizations, very large Fortune 10 organizations, Fortune 500 organizations that have the best technology. They have the best technical expertise, but where they're falling flat is conversation design. And I think a really important thing here is beginning to develop a systematic process around conversation design. As far as I can tell, conversation design, if you go out and ask 10 people, they will all give you different explanations for what conversation design is. So, for us, and I think for organizations, I think it's very important to either hire the expertise or to build out a systematic process yourself. And that's what we sort of have here. Everything from the discovery phase of understanding the use cases to the analysis of prioritizing use cases and understanding personas and bot personas to the generation phase of doing role play and Wizard of Oz testing to really be able to create a data-driven conversation design dialogue flow, and to optimization, right? Which is, can we improve on the design, with more integrated Wizard of Oz testing? How do we integrate copywriting techniques and psychological mechanisms and traditional UX best practices to increase the engagement of those conversations? So just at a high level here, definitely something to take note of. So now specifically getting to use case identification. How do you identify that in an organization? And there's a couple of models we like to use. One of them is this model where we compare complexity to value. And as you can see, on the axis, on the y-axis, there's complexity. On the x-axis, we have value. When you're starting out building conversational AI in organizations, you want to go for the easy wins. You want to go for the really easy wins and then build up your way to the strategic opportunities that are going to require more investment, more stakeholder buy-in, and more core competencies. But focusing on easy wins will allow you to sort of propel yourself through that AI playbook initially. Now, the other component here is when you begin to look at use cases, evaluating them, we like to use the balanced breakthrough model as well. Like, is it desirable? Is it creating value? Is it technologically feasible? Do we have the technical acumen, or can we hire a team to help us out? And is it economically viable? Do we have the funds to drive this thing forward? And essentially applying that to each use case and then ranking them based upon these criteria here is very useful. And now the final thing is, even if you go through the first and second model, the final thing is to actually evaluate whether or not this specific use case is even a good fit for conversational user interface. Now, there are some use cases that are just bad use cases for conversational AI. So we want to go through a checklist, something similar to this, where we can begin to evaluate the use case on characteristics that would align it to a conversational interface. And obviously, more of these things is going to be better and is going to accommodate that use case versus having less of these things here. So I'll make a final note here that's actually going back to the start of the presentation. I think the circumstances right now, I think there hasn't ever been a better time to begin to implement conversational AI chatbots in the workplace. Number one, there's increased data, right? If we just think about the transition to remote work, we're going to be generating much more data than before, whether that's analyzing productivity to just facilitating more correspondence over UC and messaging platforms, which is the second thing. The channels where voice and chat can exist are being embraced at this significant level that we haven't seen in the past. And then finally, organizations are looking to ensure that they can continue to capture workplace value, provided, traditional processes and workflows, some of them are not working anymore. So there's certainly also an appetite to start looking at these things. So on that note, I appreciate the time. My name is Chad Oda. I'm the head of consulting at Chatmode. I would love to reach out, or I would love to have you guys reach out if you guys have questions, would like to partner, or interested in developing bots. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that was great. I was making some notes, and yeah, man, so many things to talk about it. So for whoever is watching us live right now, I'm just showing the Chad contact here. You can find him on LinkedIn, Chad Oda. How am I pronouncing right?
Yeah, Oda.
Oda. Okay, in Portuguese would be Oda.
Still pretty close in Portuguese too.
Yeah. Yeah, and on Twitter is the Chad_Oda, and his email is chad@chatmode.io. I don't know if anyone has a question right now. I have some questions here, and as I was walking through your presentation, I really love the framework that you presented for the maturity level of the companies that are working today. How or where do you think that the majority of the market is right now? Is it in the beginning, the report level, or could be like bigger than that? Like the Gartner cycles. Like it's a. Yeah. Where do you think that we are in your model and also in the Gartner's model?
Right. And it's funny because I was actually just looking at the digital workplace hype cycle from Gartner, the 2021 that just came out yesterday. So I'll answer it in two ways. One, anecdotal evidence, so based on our own experience. And then two, I'll definitely mention the hype cycle to where Gartner actually says it is. So from what we see today, enterprise organizations, so the large organizations, are seeing the most advanced implementation of internal-facing chatbots. And I don't think this is too surprising, because the large enterprise organizations they're not only implementing conversational AI, but many of them are building dedicated departments around the innovation, around how they can apply conversational AI within the organization, and also customer facing. I was talking to a bank, and they were telling me they were hiring to build out a conversation design department. So you can begin to sort of see like how the maturity in enterprise is sort of going. I think those organizations are sort of at the level between the back-end integrations with existing business applications and slowly beginning to touch the RPA. Now, when you look at sort of smaller organizations in the mid-market space, I think they have the ones that have the lowest adoption rate of conversational AI, and the bots that they are sort of experiencing are more around that knowledge management piece. Excuse me. That being said, where Gartner sort of places the maturity. So when you look at the Gartner hype cycle, they essentially say that we're still in the trough of disillusionment, essentially meaning that the bots have not lived up to its value. And, I don't necessarily disagree with them, but I think there have been two phases over the last, 4 years or so. I think chatbot sort of came to fruition around 2016. There's been really two phases that have occurred. First phase is that when back in 2016, IBM Watson came out and they were saying, you give us all your data, it automatically answers any question. And a lot of pilots failed. The use cases were too complex. There wasn't an understanding of conversation design. And I think a lot of the fact that chatbots are in that phase in the Gartner hype cycle, I think is attributed to that. But I think since then, many organizations have begun to become more educated on these subjects and are now understanding that they need to focus on simple use cases to build the core competency as well as drive initial value, and then be able to incrementally scale. As long as they have that underlying architecture to create more advanced experiences. So generally, I would say that we are in this re-emergence phase right now. And I think we're on a good track, I would say.
Yeah, down here in Brazil, there are some corporates, mainly like telecom and also banks. They started to create like schools for AI. I don't know if you have seen that outside, but I'm gonna mention like two of them. So one is Vivo. Vivo is a telecom, and they announced that they created like an internal school for customer service agents that uses the phone, and then these people, they can go to this school, learn about new technology, and then go back to the work that they used to have. But what they do on this like recycling thing is that they get the learnings, the data, and they get the people to teach the AI model to become better. So they analyze the answers and they help to improve the model. The same idea, there is another corporate, which is a bank. It's called Banco do Brasil. It's the oldest Brazilian bank. They also have this too, and today they focus more on the content and the strategy that it's because since it's a big bank and has so many years, it's funny, it's the very first Brazilian company ever. So these people, they have different like verticals in a sense, like they can talk about different knowledge or different kinds of topics. And they have many writers inside of this school helping they to evolve the AI and something like this. Do you think like the diversity, for example, like the committees, right? And is it the same word in English? Mm-hmm. Should companies kind of think about that too today? Or I mean, as I just told you, like down here, some companies, they are kind of doing that. But do you see this in like other countries or examples around the US?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that I like to think about it is diversity, equity, and inclusion is sort of the effect and the or sort of the cause, right? It's like we haven't done a good job providing diversity in product development or even training data, right? And it causes, unfortunately, certain models to not be representative of all people, right? Now, the effect to that is what we're seeing around AI auditing, right? In AI and bias, right? So there's a lot of attention now around regulations and governance of how do we build AI models and ensure that they are going to be representative. So there's two core factors here, right? One is sort of establishing more systematic processes around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Everything from the hiring pipeline to who is actually building these products, to evaluating the data we're training these models with, and then that will sort of enable better AI models to be deployed. So I actually know a company out of San Francisco, and what they've done is they've built out a solution to essentially systematically enable the analysis and auditing of AI models for organizations, right? So you don't get into a situation where you're building a model that's not going to work correctly, right? So there is a lot of research going into AI auditing and AI bias. And then similarly, there's a lot of research going into diversity, equity, inclusion. And both of these things need to work in consort for organizations to be very innovative. Because at the end of the day, we have to consider this fact. The more perspectives, the more diverse perspectives that we can put into products allows us to actually build better products, because it's going to be more representative of more of our customers, or they could be our employees as well. So I think there's a real competitive advantage that can be created from this area of thought.
You're right. Diversity, like, it seems that today is a big thing, but people have been talking about this for a long time. But I guess that, like, only now we have the platforms, scalable platforms like social media, things like that, that helps us to share our thoughts and also our way of thinking, and also to educate others, and to, I don't know, to create this horizontal conversation, right? Because it's a delicate topic, and sometimes people just afraid of, like, oh, I'm not going to talk about that. I don't know how to deal with that. And it's just, like, interesting to see that we have the same thing now here, especially with diversity, and it takes some time to change. And I mean, in terms of, like, not only like the diversity, like the gender and all the other things, like, but there is a meme that sometimes I say, it's a Brazilian meme. There is a journalist. This person is doing, like, an interview with, like, a CEO of a company, and then this person saying, like, what is innovation for you? And then the guy just, like, do you see that light? And then the person just, like, what light? And it's just like, yeah, that's it. Like, I can see that. I see that in front of me, but you're not seeing because you're facing in another way. That's innovation. You need to be looking other directions. And I guess that, like, a way of building, like, these different visions is when you have a diverse team and bring people different perspectives, backgrounds, colors, sexual orientations, things like that. Helps us to create things that we could not think of it. It's really weird. I don't know, weird and interesting to think that we can build we can build out of the different visions, not with the same visions, but the different visions help us to shape things better. Do you think about this too?
I like to think about it also from the perspective of it should be very obvious to us, right? As humans, it should be very obvious, because if you think about AI, right, how do models get better? The more data that your model can be trained on, the better it will be in certain circumstances. And almost it's the same thing with diversity, equity, inclusion, right? The more diverse perspectives and visions we can bring together, the superior products we're going to build. So yeah, I absolutely agree with that, and I think it's very imperative. Both from the perspective of, it's just the right thing to do, but also from the perspective that it creates a competitive advantage, right? I mean, if I can speak to this audience and empathize with them and understand what they're looking for out of experience better than this company, I'm going to be able to be more profitable, right? So I think there are two ways to look at it, and both of them are valid.
Yeah. Well, during your presentation, you mentioned the quote from Noel about the multi-channel, multi-assistant, and also multi-platform experience. You mentioned something that really I just like, that's interesting. About the platform decision. Why would you say that? Like during the presentation, you say like, oh, deciding like a platform, it's like a strategic or a tactical decision to make.
Yeah. So
I like the quote and I like the highlight. I was curious about why would you say that?
Yeah, sure. So the reason why I said that so the point that we have to think about here is there are so many platforms right now that they allow you to build bots, right? Some of them, they allow you to build bots. Some of them have the middleware built into it. So you can do the entire lifecycle management. There's a CMS integrated, there's security and authentication. But we need to have platforms that are also thinking about how are we integrating for ambient computing, right? And essentially, it doesn't need necessarily mean that, we're all going to have all the sensors integrated into the environment and also into the experience, but ensuring that architecture of the platform can enable that, right? So for example, let's just say that if I wanted to integrate computer vision into my digital assistant, how easily would that be, right? So most platforms today, the architecture doesn't make it necessarily accessible to do that. So that's why, Gartner has been saying, when you look at platforms today, you just have to sort of assume that you're going to want to go to a different platform in the future, right? So they're pretty much saying that standards haven't really been set in the space that we operate in that, sort of designate this is the standard type of platform that will enable you to scale and have extensibility. Now, I agree and I disagree with them. I agree from the perspective that yes, there are a lot of platforms that, number one, might not be here in the next 2-3 years because the ecosystem is consolidating, right? Number two, there are a lot of platforms that are pretty good, but don't have that architecture to scale easily or have extensibility. So I agree with that factor, right? But I also disagree because I think there are also some architectures and platforms that do enable that, right? So I think the Microsoft virtual assistant architecture is a good example of that. And of course, there are other noteworthy examples as well. So I guess the real answer here is sort of your traditional consulting answer. It depends. So, but anyways, that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, I like it, and I had this mixed feeling too. Like, I agree, but I don't know.
Yeah.
And like, there is the book from Tim O'Reilly. Do you know the O'Reilly, right? The animals covers and etc. So he has a book called WTF? What's the future? It's not that.
Yeah.
I don't know if you read that book, but I was just like, that guy, he's so genius, like to state something like this and actually make sense in terms of like what the book is about. And one of the things that he kind of states in the book is it's about like consultancy, like, hey, you need to have a consultancy or listen to these guys or whoever is just guiding you, but you need to live the market. You need to see what the things are going on. Because sometimes, like Uber or like these new business models or startups, in the beginning, no one kind of believed that. Like, you're crazy. Like, and then when we look today, it's just like a huge product. And today, I guess that everything is kind of evolving and things are kind of becoming to be more like mature, or I don't know. Down here, for example, WhatsApp. WhatsApp, it's one of the main app down here. It's like a WeChat something. We just don't have the payments. We kind of have it, but then we don't have it, and then we have it. It's just like a government thing. What do you think about like the maturity of the, I don't know, the workforce, or like the people who are kind of pushing these experiences to the market? Down here, sometimes we have like these discussions, like there are so many talented people, but sometimes the project is the main companies that are kind of working in the industry right now, they're just getting here. So like considering your model, they're just like in the report phase. And then everybody's just like, we can do so much more, but we need to build this foundation before. What do you think? Like, do you think that the market is, at least the workforce, like people like me and you, or people who can create this, do you see this need for more people in the workforce is just fine, or there are so many people that the market is okay? What do you think about that?
Yeah, about whether people should be focusing on these specific skill sets. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, like the workforce, is it like it's a good moment to jump on this
Yeah.
workforce, or it's just
Yeah.
wait or go to a corporate and see what we can work on over on that side?
Yeah. So yeah, I actually this is what I think about that. I agree that people should be looking more intently around automation, AI, and data as a skill set, because I think what we're seeing, and everyone knows, by 2030, we've all seen the statistics, there's going to be a certain percentage of jobs that will be automated or augmented with automation. So certain jobs are not going to be existing, in that amount of time. And I think COVID and the pandemic has accelerated that transition, that reskilling need. Because essentially, if you look at a lot of traditional retailers right now, and it's seasonal right now. So the period where they typically get the most amount of commerce, they're hiring more for their warehouses. They're hiring more for e-commerce positions, and the traditional people that work on the retail floor don't have jobs anymore. So what we're seeing is this acceleration of that trend of people losing their jobs to automation. And it's because of COVID. Is the pandemic is disrupting traditional business models. So I absolutely think it's an imperative to start familiarizing yourself, training, educating yourself around AI, automation, and data. I don't think it's going anywhere, and I think it's just going to continue to drive significant change, really on 3 levels. First level is disruption and also evolution of business models, right? So, for example, conversation designer wasn't really something you could do before, right? I mean, like only now, it's an actual thing, but also like new businesses can emerge too, right? So it's just like, think about like annotation, right? Annotating data for AI models, right? So new business models will emerge. The second thing is, as I mentioned, reskilling is necessary. So new job titles will be created, as well as the necessity to reskill existing workforces. The third thing is the fact that the traditional idea of a job is being transformed as well, right? We think about freelancer, or we think about, these sort of these contract-based platforms that sort of allow you to access talent in a demand sort of oriented capacity. I think are also going to begin to shift the way that people work. So yes, I absolutely agree. Like we need to spend time and focus on here. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, I was expecting you to talk a little bit about the low code, no code. Like we live in a moment that anyone can do pretty much anything. And it's in a time that we don't even need to know how to code. And maybe it's a good moment to everyone to just focus on the areas that you mentioned: AI, data, and the third one is the
Automation.
automation. Yeah, maybe since I'm a product designer, I would say like focus a little bit on understanding the customer needs and UX practices, and there are other things too, like soft skills, things like that. It's crazy to think that the future is more humane than what we think that it's not going to. I mean, in order to be in the market, we need to be more human than the machines. That's what we're going to be needing in the future, I guess. And there is this like big transitions of the companies too. Every big company is now becoming like a platform. Some of them, they're now becoming like schools. Like they need to educate the market so people can understand what the company or even the startup is up to. And they need to be pushing like new things, not only in terms of like technology, but everything, like the narrative. Like there is no, like even like we were talking like few days, I don't know, a month, 2 months ago about the Apple Knowledge Navigator. That was one step from Apple trying to educate the majority about the narrative that the technology is going to be like part of our days. Like we're going to be so connected to the technology that we can just be like preparing a class and then chat with the AI. That's crazy to think. And here we are, I guess.
Yeah, Apple. So Apple's recent announcement, actually, speaking of so they're re-releasing the HomePod.
Do you have one?
I don't have one, but I'm considering it. I think Apple has a huge edge on the competition. I know Amazon and Google have really big leads, but I think the difference here is Apple owns the software and hardware layers. So for them to orchestrate experiences is going to be a lot more accessible than, say, a Google or Amazon. Sure, they can do it, but it will be more difficult to a certain extent. So I'm really excited to see what Apple does in the space.
Yeah, I guess like what Apple does really good is that everything is kind of connected. I can be doing things on my iPad and then I just press like copy and then continue on my phone, paste, and then I continue. If I just want to go to a bigger screen, I can just go to my computer and be changing things. The ecosystem it's amazing, and the back end connecting everything is just like crazy to think that
Totally.
things are here and here at both of the same time. It's just like crazy. For the HomePod, I guess that we just need to see like a SDK that people can develop skills or actions like we can do on Google or on Alexa. Today, as a developer, you can basically like create an app on your app that Siri can kind of evoke. So just say whatever, like, hey Siri, buy me some foods, and something like this is going to something like this is going to happen. But it's kind of missing. I wish I have something like this down here in Brazil. It's really expensive down here. There are some memes in Brazil that you can either buy a car or buy a new iPhone, which is so like, yeah,
that's crazy.
I
also see William has a question here about GDPR.
Yeah, do you know what is that?
Yeah, I'll speak to that a little bit. I'm not a GDPR expert, but I think I get the general direction of your question. I completely think that.
So which one? Just for the accessibility reason, what is the question? Which one?
I think it says bots are in ascension. Do you think the GDPR will break this ascension?
What do you think we need to do in order to go through?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's a paradox that exists. It's like people want more customization and personalization, but they say they don't want to give up more privacy, which I don't necessarily think is the case. That being said, I think we certainly need more policy level guidance. I think GDPR is great, and I agree that to a certain extent it will slow down the process, but I think the pressure of that ascension of the ecosystem will drive policymakers. I think in the US we need to see more guidance on this. It's actually quite strange that technology companies like Facebook and Amazon and Apple are setting privacy precedents in whichever degree that they feel responsible for. Like Apple is very privacy centric versus Facebook. It's strange to me that the technology companies are setting precedents. We should be seeing this at the policy level from governments. So I think the responsibility definitely falls on policymakers, which is why I think the European Union, made a good first step with GDPR. Now, how do we actually address that if not from a policy perspective, or how do we address that from a technology level? I think there's some really exciting things around federated machine learning. So essentially we can de-anonymize certain data that we're training our models on, which I think will be actually pretty huge. There's an initiative out of Stanford called the Almond virtual assistant, and that's sort of their architecture around a federated virtual assistant ecosystem where individual people can they can sort of modify their degree of privacy and what information they want to share. And then you have other people creating, federated machine learning models that try and de-anonymize data. So I think those technologies may help to address privacy concerns at a technology level, but I think policymakers in the US and abroad need to begin to look at these things a lot closer and not let technology companies drive privacy and policy around that area.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that all this discussion is kind of related to the actual business model of the internet based on ads, basically.
That's right.
And the need and the I don't know, the angry. Yeah, people just want the data to collect the data, and it's not transparent about why they're doing this. I don't know if you know, but in Brazil, we just started to have a version of GDPR, which is called LGPD. Yeah, LGPD. Yeah, and it's basically the same principles, trying to make the data collection more clear. But I guess that, have you seen the social dilemma thing?
I haven't yet. I'm a little scared to watch it, to be honest.
Why?
Well, because like I mean the implication of it, right? It's like we are the data that's training these machine learning models to make us more addicted to social media. I'll watch it eventually, but
yeah, there are some discussions around that. So there is one which is about the business model, and the second one is about how this technology, they were kind of created to make it so addictive that we just spend so much time on it. And authors like Ni Eo, the hooked model, that like he created that and trying to educate the entrepreneurs about like how to create more addictive products. So it's basically the potential business model. It's just crazy. Yeah, I love the show, but I'm a little bit biased to talk about it because I have a friend on the show. And yeah, I really believe what he talks about. I guess you know him, Joey Toscano. I don't know if we ever talked about him.
I know I have him added on LinkedIn. I'm trying to remember if I had a conversation with him recently. Or
yeah, he's on the show. He has a book about that, and I strongly believe on the things that he's kind of talking about. But yeah, man, like the politicians, they need to move faster than the technology, right? Because the technology is just there, people's house, people's hands.
I mean, I think there's also a real question about government involvement. I think especially, when we see this AI arms race between US and China, it's not really a government model that is going to work in most places, but there's centralized, essentially resource planning. They are subsidizing and investing and spending so much time building the infrastructure to try and facilitate the growth of AI. And the US doesn't even really have tangible guidelines around how to foster more AI innovation. So I agree that policymakers certainly have a significant opportunity to propel us forward or drop the ball. So I agree, they need to catch up quickly here.
Yeah. Apple and Fortnite is a great example of that.
Yeah. That's interesting, right? It's totally to the point, right? Technology companies setting precedent around these issues that policymakers should be addressing.
That's crazy. Yeah. And the commercial was just like on point. Honestly, I'm a little divided on that. I like the provocation, but I guess could be discussed before. I guess that was Fortnite really wanting to make the change, and then just like, I'm going to do whatever I want to make the change, and I guess it's worth it. But it was just, I guess was just not expected from Apple or Google, even the commercial, which was for me the highlight of this. Have you seen the commercial?
I haven't seen it, but my friend's been keeping me up to date with the whole, Apple. Is it what game studio is it? Epic Games.
Yeah, Epic Games. Yeah, it's basically like a new version of the Apple's famous commercial, like the 1984.
Oh, so they're mocking Apple.
Yeah, they created with like a Fortnite characters doing the same thing in the old commercial, and if you put like side by side, it's basically the same idea. So it's Fortnite trying to say like, we need to change the big guys as in the 84. It's just funny. History repeats itself. Basically,
it's crazy. Yeah. It's I think the cool thing is that we, all of us on the call and we get the opportunity to try and shape and foster and create the future here. So I think that's the really exciting part, right?
Yeah, I guess that if we think for a moment, like, this is so crazy. Technology is just here in everybody's house. It's more accessible than ever.
Right.
And the expectations is that it's become even more accessible within the years. It's just that there are some small and big things, or even things that we don't see it, that we need to regulate, I guess, or create some legislation so it can protect from us and for us. And it's just something that we need to work on that in a global scale. In Brazil, things are just like crazy.
Yeah, absolutely.
With all the the political moment down here. But yeah, I guess that we're here for about like an hour and 40 minutes now. It was a great conversation, Chad. I'm sorry in the beginning for my internet. I'm not sure if my internet is okay, but I wasn't expecting to begin like that.
No worries.
But I love the presentation. It was the very first time that we did an event at 4 p.m. in the Thursday in the week. It was a good trying. So thank you so much for being here today with us. I hope we can have another moment like this. Honestly, for the December event, I'm planning to have like a global panel. So let's see if we'd like to represent the North America. Would like to be part of that?
That sounds exciting. I would love to be a part of that. And I really enjoyed the platform here that you guys have built and the community you've built. And I really appreciate all the questions. Been really informative. And thank you, Kyle, for setting this up.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, everybody, we're going to finish this live event. We're going to have another meetup in English in a month, I guess. And yeah, today is October 27th. Yeah, so in the end of November, we're going to have another one. So take it easy, everybody. Have a good week. And thank you, Chad, for being here with us today. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thank you.